I don't know whether we can see them on the screen. First of all, Mahbouba Siraj. I hope she can see us and hear us, journalist and women's rights activist. Nemad Bijan, former Deputy Youth Minister of Afghanistan. Mueed Yusuf, National Security Advisor to the Prime Minister of Pakistan. And I think we will also be joined, but not yet. Oh, I think Tom West is in. Is that you, Tom? Can you hear us? Okay, Tom is not on yet. Wonderful. So we have 3 out of 4. That's a good start.
That's a good start. Today, we're not keen to talk about the past. In regards to Afghanistan, I think we don't have the time. Otherwise, that would be longer than 1 hour and 1 day, 1 month. But let me summarize Afghanistan's recent past using a sad but true viral quote. If you ever feel useless, consider and remember it took 20 years, trillions of dollars, and 4 American presidents to replace the Taliban with the Taliban. So let's not repeat the same mistakes.
We have some rules in this town hall, and basically they are keep it short because we want to have a conversation. We're not looking for statements. We'll start with 3 questions, and I'll read them to you. First question, can the humanitarian crisis in Afghanistan be resolved by humanitarian aid alone? Second, what does a principled approach to engagement with the Taliban look like? And third, going forward, so looking ahead, as Natalie has pointed out, what are the lessons we can draw from 20 years of Western engagement in Afghanistan that can help us be productive and help people in Afghanistan?
And I want to encourage you here in the town hall and also online to send us your questions via Slido, and you will see the code. And you can just send your question, and we will bring them here to the town hall. I want to quote the Secretary General of the UN. He said, people in Afghanistan face one of the world's most rapidly growing humanitarian crises. We have plans to reach over 22 million people in need, but have only received 9% of the funds required. I urge the international community to support our efforts before it's too late. I want to direct the first question to a woman I met recently in Afghanistan, in Kabul, and I can just tell you I was so overwhelmed by her. She could easily flee, like thousands of other people did, but Mahbouba Siraj stayed in Kabul, and she said, no, I will not give up. I will fight, and all the women have to come back because we have to fight together. We don't have to give Afghanistan to the Taliban. We are half of the population, and we will fight. So she was named, I wanted to add this, as one of the most influential 100 people of 2021 from the Time magazine. Mahbouba Siraj, سلام به شما، خیلی خوش اومدید. Khanum Siraj, my question is short. Let us know your thoughts about the answer. Can the humanitarian crisis in Afghanistan be resolved with humanitarian aid alone?
No, it will not be. It's like trying to, trying to stop bleeding from a gushing wound with a Band-Aid. You cannot do that. You cannot put a Band-Aid on a gushing wound and expect it to be, for the bleeding to stop. It will not happen. So the same thing will not happen in Afghanistan with just the humanitarian help alone.
So what has to be done? What are your suggestions?
My suggestion is that as long as the money, it has to be like a wheel. The wheel of economy should start turning. if it doesn't, just pouring money, and then that money is going to be finished. There is no way that is going to continue. The world is not going to continue giving us money for the humanitarian crisis to be resolved, because that's going to be one crisis after another. So it has to be. We have to start making the wheels of economy in Afghanistan start moving again. So, in other words, factories should start working. Projects that they are development projects should start coming back. People should get work, should get jobs, not money for their food for one day and then not have anything the next day. So for right now, I know it's important to have the help of the international community, but this alone is not going to help Afghanistan. That's my opinion.
So what would you say, which role can the West play? You know, we know that 20 years we sent billions of dollars and we just managed to build up a corrupt state. So
Yes.
what can we do better than the last 20 years?
Well, the way I see the world going right now, I'm terribly sorry to say that, but the same mistakes is going to be happening again. Because they're listening to the same people, they're doing the same thing, the mistakes are going to be repeated. So it's like, I don't even know what do they expect. They are doing the same old thing all over again. So it's not going to work this way. We have to start thinking about this whole thing differently, differently in a way that we should involve the people of Afghanistan. For the 20 years, the people of Afghanistan were not involved. There was just a bunch of them that were involved, and they were the ones that they got the money, they got the profit, and everything. And then the international community was continuously deciding for the Afghanistan government what to do, what not to do. So this is not what is going to be happening. But to me, right now, the answer to this question really is with the international community. Do they really want peace in Afghanistan to happen? Do they want these people to live a peaceful life? Or they don't? If they do, then they have to really start, looking at it from a different angle. Otherwise, it's going to be the same mistakes repeated all over again.
And the time is running out. I can just tell you what I saw in Afghanistan. There were marketplaces, poor people selling all their belongings. They have nothing, and just to get bread for the next day. But once they're sold their belongings, they don't have to sell anything anymore, so they can even buy bread. And the people started to sell their children. The people are, it's like it's a catastrophic situation right now and has to be fixed today. So we have to start. Foreign Minister, you recently welcomed a Taliban delegation in Oslo. What is your answer to my question that I also asked Ms. Seraj, maybe including the results of Oslo, and your impression what is possible to do with the Taliban?
Well, the answer to question number one is no. Thank you for the invitation to this panel. I guess I was invited because we invited Taliban to Oslo for talks, a 3-day meeting. I believe this meeting was important, but it was not a bilateral meeting. We did it together with our allies, but this was not the first meeting between representatives from Norway and the Taliban, because we have been engaged with the Taliban since 2007. So the former Minister of Foreign Affairs, Jonas Gahr Støre, he is now the Prime Minister of Norway. So I had his full support when I invited them. It was controversial, I mean, among Afghans and among Norwegians. But we are a small nation and have a tradition of engaging with various groups, like, I mean, the FARC guerrilla, Hamas, Maoists in Nepal, Hezbollah. So we believe that if we are listening to their assessment, we'll get a better understanding of how we can solve a conflict like that. So I did not meet with them because we are reluctant to recognize them and will not do that. So my state secretary met with them. So this was the first meeting when representatives from Taliban met with civil society, human rights activists, and also women's groups. So this was the first step. It was only the first step for a more inclusive government, because that's the solution on your question. And we are also following very closely what they're going to do when it comes to girls' right to education. I mean, we cannot continue financing their schools if those schools are only for boys. So they said in a meeting in Oslo that they would open schools for girls. Well, they have to deliver when they get back home. So that's the next step.
Are we satisfied if they just open the schools? What is with an inclusive government?
Yeah.
What is with religious minorities?
Yeah, that was also in the common, I mean, assessment from the whole Western society. The situation for Christians was one of part of the discussion we had with them.
Shia people,
Shia
Hazara.
people, all kind of religious minorities. So more inclusive government will be a precondition for a development in Afghanistan, in my opinion. So this was the first step. I mean, they said various things in international meetings before, so we have to make them accountable. So that would be the next step.
Muid, in Islamabad, I'm tempted to ask you the question that I read out earlier, which is, what does a principled approach to engagement with the Taliban look like? But I realize that from a Pakistani point of view, perhaps that's an odd question to ask. Because, of course, you have a history of engaging with the Taliban that is different from ours. What advice would you give? How should we deal with the Taliban? Do you have any thoughts?
Thank you. First of all, thank you for the invitation. I'm not sure why you say it's an odd question. I think all of us are grappling with the same situation, frankly, where you've got a reality on the ground. The Taliban are there. They seem to have consolidated power enough to stay in power. And now we've got to balance two critical things. One, we cannot punish 35 million Afghans for 30 Taliban that some may not like. At the same time, Pakistan stands for inclusivity, for human rights, and for ensuring there's no terrorism from Afghan soil. You've got to understand when you say that, Pakistan is engaged with the Taliban, for others, it may be a luxury to decide when and how the engagement will happen. We are one country that has actually seen, felt, and been harmed by instability in Afghanistan for over 4 decades. Just since 9/11, we've had 80,000 casualties, $150 billion lost in the economy. So for Pakistan, it is an absolute national security imperative that the world come together to ensure that there is a semblance of stability, at least in Afghanistan, and that there is a criteria, there is an engagement based on which, as our first speaker said, I'm worried that humanitarian assistance is being presented now as the end point. That's just one small part of what needs to happen immediately. Ultimately, it's the economy that has to function for the 35 million Afghans to make ends meet. 70% of Afghan public spending in the last 20 years came from abroad, from the US and others. And the rest of the 30% was taxes linked to the war economy one way or another. And so, I think we've got to be judicious in this. Pakistan has been calling on the world to ensure that Afghans don't suffer. We have been trying to get regional diplomacy and global diplomacy on behalf of the Taliban. But because it's a very clear national security imperative for my country, and I think there's an ethical and moral responsibility here for the world to ensure that we don't throw the baby out with the bathwater, which is suffer because we are going to decide later on whether we recognize or not, whether the Taliban are good enough or not. These things are linked. Ultimately, we have to engage, find a way to get assistance into Afghanistan, and in return get the kind of inclusivity and sort of no terrorism and all those pledges that need to be there.
Thank you, Moeed. So essentially what I take from your answer is that you believe the West should be more pragmatic in its relationship with the Taliban and recognize the realities on the ground. Is that a fair summary?
Let me just put it this way. What alternative do we have right now? 20 years of war where Pakistan kept saying that the military solution will not come in favor of the West. Now we have something on the ground. One option is we hope and wait that this doesn't work, and in the process, millions and millions of Afghans suffer. The other one is that we act pragmatically. We find a way to get what we want in terms of governance and the model of governance, but then support Afghanistan for the sake of Afghanistan to allow it to become stable. Because let me just say this much. I think we made a mistake as the international community in the 90s thinking that Afghanistan was only Afghanistan or Pakistan or the region's problem. We know what came out of that. Even today, I have to tell you, unfortunately, I've heard myself, very responsible officials saying, well, please deal with the migration and refugee problem in the region and we'll help you. It will not remain contained. Terrorism does not remain contained. So let's not make the mistake we've made before. Let's do what we need to do ethically, morally, and frankly, in terms of geopolitics to ensure Afghanistan has some semblance of stability. It doesn't become a danger for anybody, especially for Pakistan. But most importantly, we help Afghans with economic development because they are and they deserve peace.
Thank you, Moeed. Let's go to Nemat. I'd like to hear you commenting on what you've heard so far. You have a strong background on economic development. How would you comment on the relationship with the Taliban? What is necessary in order to keep Afghanistan going and enable a more normal life for people in Afghanistan?
Thank you for the opportunity. I would like to start with a statement that the current crisis in Afghanistan is political, not technical. So that means we need to address the drivers or the causes of that fragility or the crisis we are facing at the moment. It's quite a difficult situation, and if it continues, Afghanistan could turn into a concentration camp for its people. What can be done at this stage, at least, thinking of society, people, and the economy, two immediate goals could be quite important. The first one is to provide humanitarian aid, to prevent this humanitarian crisis from deepening and also preventing the economy from collapsing. But the challenge is now how that can happen because the de facto government, the Taliban, are not recognized by the international community. The same mechanism that we were we are criticizing in the last 2 decades to be used now, and thus creating a parallel public sector which bypasses the de facto government and authority that can enable to deliver aid directly to people and beneficiaries in Afghanistan, and also to prevent essential services such as health, education from collapsing in Afghanistan. Of course, that's not the most desirable, but at least at this stage, we need to maintain a level of sustainability in delivering services, and also reducing poverty and tackling the problem of hunger.
Mr. Bijan, what do you say about the American decision that President Biden split the assets for Afghans and for the victims from 9/11? So a lot of Afghans told me that that's so unfair, you know. The world's richest country has decided to rob the world's poorest country in the name of justice. So what do you say about this decision?
Well, if we see it politically, Afghans are the victim of Cold War and the war on terror. How they could be punished to pay for what happened during the tragic events of 9/11. If there is a will by a global power, those who are behind these attacks to be kept to account, states or non-state actors. The implications of this decision would be worsening of the economic crisis in Afghanistan, and also as the matter of confidence in Afghanistan, because it undermines the confidence. And the way now people feel about what has happened or evolved after August last year, they strongly feel to be betrayed by one of the allies, because what happened in Afghanistan, it was with the withdrawal that could have managed or could have been managed in a responsible manner.
Foreign Minister, did you talk about measures like which are really functioning?
Yeah, but they have to deliver when they get back home. So that was my message, you know. We made this common statement together with our allies, with our expectations, and we need to hold them to their words. So that was the most important message we gave to them. And when it comes to girls' right to participate and also education, I actually think that we can push them, but I believe Muslim majority countries might be even better positioned to discuss this with Taliban. So we will cooperate with other countries to put this on the agenda when they meet Taliban. So they told us they will open up schools. They have to deliver. So they said that, I mean, girls over 12 years secondary education will be opened after the winter holiday. This is in March, so we'll follow that.
I have a question for Mr. Yusuf. I was talking this morning with a profound expert on Taliban, and he told me, look, without Pakistan, Taliban would not exist. So Pakistan controlled the Taliban all the time the last 20 years, and with all the respect, but I'm a journalist, I have to say, played also a double game with the West. So did your influence on the Taliban recently decrease? Because you could help them more than to be right now in this devastated situation. They're really not doing one thing that, you know, organize something in all their problems. So what is your answer to that?
Shocking. We just started the panel by saying that we shouldn't make the mistakes of the past. isn't it just too convenient to constantly just talk about Pakistan and because of Pakistan, and they wouldn't exist because of Pakistan? This question. So Pakistan controlled the Taliban. That's the insinuation. Presumably we controlled them so that we could control whatever happened in Afghanistan after they came to power, presumably. So now they're in power. And the Western press is reporting every day that there are problems on the border. There are terrorists who've attacked Pakistan from there. They've closed the border multiple times since they've come into power on because of one reason or another. What kind of control is this? Or maybe magically we had control and suddenly the day they came into power, the control disappeared. Look, I mean, let's be, there was a policy applied for 20 years in Afghanistan, which was a failing policy. The current Prime Minister of Pakistan for 15 years repeatedly publicly said, you won't get a military solution here. Understand Afghanistan's history, understand the culture, and realize that just guns are not going to deliver. The other that we keep talking about this double game business. The double game was that you created an environment in Afghanistan that was vicious towards Pakistan, where terrorism continued every day from Afghanistan, and yet Pakistan continued to be blamed. If our view had been taken on board, frankly, Western taxpayers would have asked Western governments hard questions earlier. Where was all the money going? We were told that the Afghan army would fight till the last day, and President Ghani at the time said there'll be a bloodbath, but we would win. What happened? Somebody was hiding something, somebody was creating a convenient narrative, which now Western taxpayers are asking the right questions. Look, let's not waste time in the past. We won't agree, we should agree to disagree. The question right now is, Afghans are suffering. Pakistan cannot afford instability in Afghanistan. We don't have an option but to engage, and we are counseling the world to be pragmatic. Let's find a way to move forward, incentivize, and get the results all of us want. Why would Pakistan not want girls' education? Why wouldn't Pakistan? Would Pakistan want terrorists to be attacking Pakistan from Afghanistan? No. So it's the same goal. All we are saying is that if the approach is Taliban have to do X, Y, Z, or else they're isolated, the girls would suffer even more.
Thanks, Mouid. Thanks. Thanks. I think Tom West is now online. And Tom, could you give us the American view on that question? How should we engage with the Taliban? To perhaps comment on what Mouid has just told us?
Thank you, and I apologize for joining late. Had some technical difficulties. Our view is that we must all continue diplomacy with the Taliban in service of our collective interests. At the moment, that is our option looking ahead. And if now we're about 6 months into Taliban rule after their forced military takeover of the country that culminated on August 15th, and I think we have to look at what that diplomacy has produced. And on some fronts, I think it's been productive. On other fronts, it has not been productive. So take the matter of women and girls' education. The West, as well as, frankly, the region as well, has engaged in fruitful, direct, candid dialogue with the Taliban on this subject since September. What have we seen? We've seen roughly 12 provinces wherein reportedly, and we need to see independent verification of this, women and girls have been permitted to go to school between grades 6 and 12. But you have a real readiness within the international community to support this sector. We have before the World Bank a proposal to expend roughly $180 million in support of teacher stipends and in support of books and in support of refurbishment of buildings and so forth. But what do we need to see from the Taliban? We need to see them deliver on stated commitments to open and enroll women and girls in education countrywide, large swaths of the country after Nowruz on March 20th. We've met with the education minister, we've met with the deputy education minister, we've met with the foreign minister on this question many, many times, but we have to see them deliver. Now, I'll take a separate issue on which our diplomacy has produced not very much because the Taliban are rigid on this question, and that is a government that reflects the richness of Afghan society. There is not one woman in a position of leadership in this government. Overwhelmingly, it is dominated by one ethnicity. I think there is a dearth of professionals at the senior-most levels of this government who are exceedingly well-educated, for instance. Now, I think it's a domestic Afghan call for a national political dialogue regarding movement from an acting government to a permanent status. We haven't seen that. And this is not a call unique to the United States. This is a call that Iran, Russia, and China are making as well, that the Central Asians make. We must see a dialogue with all segments of Afghan society unfold. And we don't have to be prescriptive about what exactly this looks like, but those are just two examples where diplomacy, I think, has produced some cautious optimism on the education front, but on representative government, very, very little.
Thanks, Tom. I want to start bringing in the audience with Natalie's permission, and I'm looking at David Miliband, President of the International Rescue Committee, and if we could get a microphone to him, then I imagine he might have something to say. We also have Hina Kar, who is former Foreign Minister of Pakistan, sitting here. Yeah? No, you should go first. I decide. No, I decide. You go first. David, it's you. Yeah?
I think it's Hina's prerogative.
Okay.
That's kind of you, David. But, okay, so Moeed has done a very good job of explaining Pakistan's position, so I'm going to keep myself away from that and just talk about this as a problem that we all had to deal with. I want to talk only about the past because I think it's exceptionally important to recognize the failures in the past which has brought us where we are. If we do not do that, then we will be repeating the same mistakes again. So the reality is, in my view, if you take a long-term view backward, that America and the West or the international community came into Afghanistan not because the Afghan people needed them. They came because there was a demand from their own people to come and attack. Okay, because post 9/11, revenge had to be taken. There had to be a tangible demonstration of something being done, and that happened. Now, when that happened, a lot of players in the region, including Pakistan, continued to say that the Taliban are a reality. We are on the record. We're not hiding this. We are on the record to say they should be part of the bond process because they are a living reality. And therefore, countries like Pakistan had to engage, as did Germany, by the way, and the United States and Norway, at a very early level, because when Iraq took away the attention. So I don't want to go deeply into the past, but all I'm saying is that the US exited the way it exited, fast forward to now, because there was a demand to exit. Because now there were other things that we were more interested in. Now, in all of that happens, what happens is the unintended consequences of that interventions is left for the region and for the Afghans to deal with. And that is the reality we can't wash our hands away from. And it isn't Pakistan or the region which is saying this. If you look at John Sopko's report, he's been talking about the same failures for a very long time. Guess what? Nobody was listening because we were very interested in the narrative of everything being great, in victory laps being taken. So we have to move away from that. And right now, unfortunately, because of how the world is presenting itself and the many problems that the world is presenting, the attention span, we cannot expect anything right now. You know why? Because they don't have the wherewithal and the means to be able to do anything. And the funds which were theirs have also been split into two. So do we want a realistic solution, or do you want to keep on talking about, euphoria and Allison? I do want to quote John Sopko because, he literally used the words that the United States is operating in Afghanistan as if it's an Alice in Wonderland. And it also said, specifically, we all know about the Cost of Wars project, okay, which has told us that 929,000 people died. 326,000 out of those were civilians. This is the cost of post-9/11 wars. Let us internalize that and understand that the rest of the interventions and how we deal with it must not be the same. The last thing I'm going to read is Seagar, John Sopko. US government did not understand Afghan context and therefore failed to tailor its efforts accordingly. Ignorance of prevailing social, cultural, and political contexts in Afghanistan has been a significant contributing factor to failures at strategic, operational, and tactical levels. And $19 billion have been lost this way between May 2009 and December 31st, 2019. So just, where you said that because of corruption that the Afghan people did. This corruption was very much known, and many Western institutions were part and parcel of that. So we are all to be blamed for what happened over there, and therefore we can all perhaps look for solutions.
So what you're quoting there is the Special Inspector General.
Absolutely.
And
on
his
Afghanistan
report.
reconstruction.
Right. Now, David is going to tell us what we're going to do looking forward, because I think the analysis of what went wrong is important, and I think you put it very nicely in a nutshell, but the question remains, where do we go from here?
So I would like to talk about the present and the future, and I do so not from my own opinions, but the opinions of 3,000 staff members that we have working across 10 Afghan provinces. 44% of those staff members are women. I spoke to some of them last week. We deliver education, we deliver livelihood support. We now operate over 60 health centres and 40 mobile health clinics. And I want to go back to what Mrs. Siraj said right at the beginning of this. There's a starvation crisis going on at the moment. The staff that we employ and the clients that they serve don't have time for an academic discussion about diplomatic recognition. What they need is a recognition of reality, not a debate about diplomatic recognition. And therefore, it seems to me that it's imperative that there be two steps to this process. Step one is to tackle the starvation crisis, and step two, and that frankly, 4 or 5 months have been lost in that. We've got 4 to 6 weeks till the snows melt. And then step two is years or months, 12, 24, 36, 48. In the short term, and really we're talking days here because the UN says that 9 million people are at international phase classification of food insecurity level 4, and level 5 is famine, and the reports in the media of children being sold, girls being sold is true, and the reports of people selling body parts to pay for food is true, and the World Food Programme say they're now expected to support 22 million people with food. That's true as well. We have a very simple recipe for this. One, public sector salaries must be paid, and they must be paid from the Afghan Reconstruction Trust Fund. Now, we can't wait till the 1st of March, which Reuters reports is the date for the World Bank meeting that's been set. Secondly, there's no point in paying salaries if people can't access their bank accounts and their cash. So the absolute necessity is to underpin the banking system with some capital. Otherwise, people can't go to the bank. We can't use banks to pay salaries at the moment. We use hawalas to pay salaries at the moment. And anyway, the banknotes are stuck in Poland because they can't be imported into Afghanistan, which is step 3. The sanctions regime that is meant to apply to over 140 individuals ends up applying to a swathe of commercial activity that is now seen as too risky to take place. And step 4 is urgent need for technical assistance in the finance ministry and the banking system and the central bank, because you can't run an economy without a finance ministry and a central bank. Now, in all these things, there is rightly, in my view, very serious criticism of the US, and Tom West knows that I've articulated this very strongly in a meeting of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee last week. But the Europeans can't sit on their hands and think that they don't share the blame as well. They're sitting on $2.5 billion worth of assets as well. They're sitting on the World Bank board. So I'm sorry to be urgent and passionate about this, but step 1 is not a kind of luxurious discussion. It's a life and death discussion. Now, step 2 does take you into bigger political questions about the trajectory of Western support, which inevitably is going to be downwards, development support. It takes you into questions about the trajectory of Gulf and other support, which I hope would be upwards. It takes you into the politics of recognition. It takes you into issues of the security guarantees that were given in the Doha discussions. And I've always believed, back to my time as foreign minister, that Afghanistan doesn't just need a domestic political settlement, it also needs a regional political settlement. The two have to go together. But I would plead that we go back to what Mrs. Siraj said at the beginning, that time is not on the side of the people who are coming to our health clinics with malnourished children at the moment. And that really should be step 1, because the worse we do in the next 4 to 6 weeks, the more difficult everything gets thereafter.
Tom West, do you have an answer?
Yeah, absolutely, and had a chance to sit down with David last week. Look, the bottom line on this is that stitching together a much more meaningful response to the needless suffering on across Afghanistan is the number one animating issue that is driving American decision making. And so just to tick through some of what David mentioned, we've passed 6 general licenses. We championed the UN Security Council resolution in December. We're working with the World Bank. We've already supported the disbursement of over $300 million. I agree with David that we need to see the next tranche of roughly $1 billion released as soon as possible. We're in touch with the World Bank on that on a daily basis. I think there are encouraging talks going on right now between the World Bank, UN Ops, and others on what they're calling a humanitarian exchange facility. But that's really a misnomer because it's designed to essentially take 40 very large companies within Afghanistan, put them on a pre-approved list for capital, and then the end result will be an infusion of Afghanis in the system, which is urgently, urgently needed. And then finally, I wanted to say to David, you are right to place, I think, responsibility on the United States, on Europe, on the countries of the region as well, when it comes to trying to fix the banking sector. But the Taliban also share responsibility in this regard. We have been meeting technocrats from their central bank since September. And we are in a good and I think productive dialogue with them. But they need to bring in a third-party contractor to improve their overall AML-CFT architecture as fast as possible. They need to take steps to make that central bank far more independent. Because even our sanctions aside, if you talk to any big bank, an American bank, a foreign bank, they look at Afghanistan, and it's not just our sanctions. It's the complete lack of an AML-CFT architecture that prevents them from wanting to engage in the market. They look at it as a completely non-profitable venture. So that's not an easy problem to fix, and I would say that the Taliban have a huge amount of responsibility to act at a whole lot faster than they have on some of the professional steps that will improve the capability and independence of the central bank.
Thanks, Tom. I understand that Lindsey Graham is going to join us in a few minutes for the final 10 minutes of our town hall. So we'll have to let him come in.
Questions.
But I think, Natalie, I think we should go back to our Afghan participants.
Yeah.
Yes, I want to pass a question from our audience to Mahbouba Siraj. Mahbouba, Khanum Aziz, what could an inter-Afghan reconciliation process look like? Is this possible, and what could be the role of third countries in this, or is it too early?
In my mind, that is the only way we can actually solve the problem of Afghanistan. We have to start the inter-Afghan dialogue as soon as possible. And we can start it by the way I look at it. We have to bring in an interim government, somebody that is kind of the go-between, that is not, like, in other words, is liked by everybody, not hated by everybody, that is with the Taliban government, is going to come in. Then we have to start with the constitution. We can either take the constitution that we have today and work on the one that we have, the constitution of Afghanistan that we have. We can take the constitution of Shah if they want to, but there's got to be a constitution, so that the people and the rules of the engagement afterwards is based on some kind of a law. Then we have to start with the Lojirga. But the Lojirga should not be a what do they call it? There is a Lojirga that has been used during the time of the two presidents, Mashwarati. Lojirga Mashwarati does not mean anything. The Loijerga of Mashwarati is something that the two governments of Afghanistan, the two presidents, brought it, to the forward picture because they knew they could use it. The Loijerga actually comes from within the people. It's not the government that asks the Loijerga, it's the people. That they do that, then they bring the representatives to the governors of each province, and they say to the governor of the province that these are the people that we have chosen. Take us to where we are going to get together, and then we are going to have the Loijerga.
You told me.
Then there's got to be.
No, continue.
Then there's got to be a discussion with our neighbors. Pakistan, Iran, China, Russia, all of the Uzbekistan, Tajikistan, and all of them, and even India. We really have to talk to them. And they all have to agree on the peacefulness of Afghanistan that is the most important.
But Mahbouba, if I
for
may
the
say,
whole region.
that sounds to me like a medium-term prospect, some of it at least. And the question is, what is the priority now?
The priority right now is feed people.
Yeah.
Exactly.
That is there is no. This is a no-brainer. Feed people. That's it. Because if this group of people they enter the level of poverty, you've lost so much. Because then hungry people don't think of having a Loijerga or having a government or having schools or having anything else. Then the people that are hungry, they want to have food. So what you should actually try to do is to avoid that. Avoid Afghanistan getting into poverty. Because poverty is a level of being, at the state where the mind is, where the body is, where the economy is, that coming back from it is going to take a long time. So that's number one, feed people.
Okay.
Yes.
Shall we bring in Nemat for a comment? Thank you, Mahbouba.
You're welcome.
Nemat, would you like to come in and address precisely the issue of priorities and what should be done in very concrete terms, what you're expecting from Europe and the United States and the World Bank, for example?
What we need at the moment in Afghanistan is to balance between short-term needs and long-term needs of people or Afghanistan. So to tackle the crisis, the humanitarian crisis, so that international community offer more humanitarian aid. And also in addition to that, coming to humanitarian crisis is human rights, having an independent body led by the UN to monitor the violation of human rights in Afghanistan. And the third one is a political settlement. Let's not to ignore that what happened as part of a political settlement process between the former government and the Taliban, it was a disaster. It was the failure of the international community, the Americans, and all the actors. Still, Afghanistan needs to reach to that settlement. Another question is I would like to add or reflect on the comment that there is no alternative to the Taliban. No, that's wrong. There is no alternative or substitute to an inclusive and just order in Afghanistan where people can determine their future and can live, Afghanistan can live, be in peace with itself and the rest of the world. It's quite complicated, but now the problem we have in Afghanistan is a political problem, not technical. That's why we need to rethink of the causes of this crisis. If we just focus on solution and neglect the problem we have in Afghanistan, we may repeat the history on and on as it happened just last year.
So I think we can welcome Senator Lindsey Graham, who's joining us from the event with President Zelensky, and I think everyone understands that Ukraine is very high on the agenda. So you're excused, Senator, for turning up late. We've been talking about what principled engagement with the Taliban looks like. That's one issue. We've been talking about how to address the desperate situation of so many people in Afghanistan who are at the brink of starvation, and what measures need to be taken by the US government, for example, to address that short-term urgent situation. So your comments would be much appreciated.
Well, thank you. Good to have an easy question to start with.
Absolutely.
So, number one, thank you for having the town hall. So I find it ironic. I had to be there to listen to the president of Ukraine because what we do in the next day or two may matter as to whether or not we have a war. I'm sure he made the calculated decision that the best thing for my country is to fly the flag in Munich, and his speech was incredible. I think it will resonate in history because it was so logical. What happens in Afghanistan in the next couple of days will not be as consequential. So that's why I was there. The likelihood of my country being attacked based on activity regarding Ukraine is pretty much zero. The likelihood that America will be attacked again from forces assembled in Afghanistan is rather significant. So to the American people, why do I go with John McCain? Why did I go to Iraq and Afghanistan so many times? To make sure that 9/11 would never happen again. So the president of Ukraine was talking about the 30s, how Europe would one time after another appease Hitler's ambition. We're not going to fight, I think the phrase was, for people who speak a different language. The Prime Minister of Great Britain. Isolationism was rampant in the United States and throughout the world. There was a great fatigue from World War I. So he was reminding us what happens when you're appeasement in the face of aggression. I'm here today to remind you what happens when you take the eye off the ball. And the biggest enemy to mankind is not Putin, it's not China, it's radical Islam with the capability to kill millions. While China and Russia are huge threats, the biggest game changer on the planet would be radical elements achieving chemical, nuclear, biological capability to use it in the name of God.
Mr. Graham, just to bring you back to Afghanistan,
Yeah, I'm
because the
getting
people
there.
are dying.
Yeah, I'm getting there. Just let me finish. So what do? I've been there a lot. I know the people who are dying. So I'm okay with trying to find a way to feed the people who are starving. I don't know how you do that. I met with David Beasley at the World Food Program. The UN agencies have been pretty good about propping up the people without propping up the Taliban. We met with the Secretary General of the United Nations about this very dilemma. I talked to the Biden administration about emergency supplemental for Afghanistan. I'll support it. Cindy McCain, Ambassador McCain, is in a space of where we're teaching people to feed themselves. But I want to give you a very clear, blunt answer. I will do nothing to empower the Taliban. The worst thing you could do to the suffering people of Afghanistan is to keep their oppressor in power one day longer than necessary. So I will never, ever do anything to legitimize this takeover by the Taliban. They will never change, they will never reform, and here's my last thought. To all of us, we need to give the people in Afghanistan a different option between the Taliban and ISIS. ISIS is growing in numbers because if you're a former Afghan soldier, the Taliban gets a hold of you, they're going to kill you and your family. So what do? You join ISIS. There has to be a better way. So I will help feed the people, but I'm also going to help empower the resistance. So to those in Afghanistan who are willing to fight back, I will do everything I can to empower you.
Minister, do you want to react to that?
Yeah, just the big problem is, I mean, how do you power the resistance? And in my opinion, right now, is the most important thing we do is to feed the people. Then we have to talk to Taliban because they are in power, and to give humanitarian access, you really have to deal with them. They're controlling the area. So you cannot really isolate them. And really? I mean, to get humanitarian access, how can I get humanitarian organization getting access?
So what are you proposing? Give money to the Taliban?
What are you proposing? Well, I talked about that before we came in. So I just cannot think that, I mean, to counter international terrorism, we cannot let people starve. So I think we have to engage and also challenge the Taliban to prevent the humanitarian emergency situation, to push them seriously on human rights issues in order to counter international terrorism.
I think that's
my approach.
That's the most naive thing I've heard. You literally know nothing about the Taliban and their agenda if you believe they're going to change. They're not going to change, folks. Now, count me in for empowering international organizations to feed the people. That makes sense to me. They're the victims of us leaving. You know, you can blame the Trump administration for setting in motion some of the demise. So I'm not here blaming Republicans or Democrats, but the day we pull the plug on Afghanistan is the day that we set in motion a disaster not only for the Afghan people, but for our own people. So the best way to deal with terrorism is to confront it and to empower those who reject it. In 2001, there were 900,000 people in school in Afghanistan. They were all men, males. In 2020, there were 9.5 million young people in school. 39% were women.
But balance, Senator. I mean, I follow you to a certain extent, but if you look at 20 years of Western engagement in Afghanistan, I think the balance sheet is pretty grim. It's also pretty grim in terms of counterterrorism. But I want to let Hannah Neumann come in, who's a member of the European Parliament.
Thank you very much, and I would like to direct a question directly to you. You said we have to do everything possible to empower the people of Afghanistan, especially the women of Afghanistan. And I think we all agree in this room that recognizing the Taliban is not going to help, so there we are on the same board. But what is the constructive effect on the citizens of Afghanistan if you dedicate 50% of the frozen assets of the citizens to Afghanistan to 9/11 victims in the US? I fail to understand that.
I could not agree with you more. I was called up by Jake Sullivan and said, he was asked, we're talking about taking half of the $7 billion and providing aid to the Afghan people. I said, why don't we do an emergency supplemental? I'm willing to ask the American taxpayer to put $3.5 billion into Afghanistan through international organizations to keep people from starving. I think when you take it from the fund that has a judgment attached to it, you send the wrong message. So we're on board here. When it comes to American taxpayer dollars, I am willing to help the Afghan people. I'm not willing to help the Taliban. And back to your question. The one thing I can tell you is the Taliban have taken over a country vastly different than 2001. The young women are not going back without a fight. They're going to be the heroes of the 21st century. The young men have seen a better day. I've been there a lot, and it's one of the most corrupt places on the planet. But I've seen in the eyes of the people a desire to move forward. So what will I do? I will do everything I can to empower the international community to prevent a decimation. We're not even talking about Yemen. If you think Afghanistan's a problem, you should go to Yemen. But count me in. But I want a strategy that would isolate this government. It is not legitimate. It came through the force of arms. The average person on the street in Afghanistan do not want to go back to the good old days of the Taliban. It is in your national security interest, no matter who you are, to make sure that Afghanistan doesn't legitimize taking over a country by a terrorist organization through the force of arms. Because if you do that, all hell is going to break loose in this world.
Thanks, Senator. Natalia, I think we're pretty much at the end, sadly.
Yes, and I have
Sorry,
the
I'm
feeling
late.
that we're just starting.
Right.
We have to continue. And yeah, I'm pretty shocked by some answers, and I hope that we do better, because, you know, when you're in a hospital and there's a child on your arm and this child cannot even cry because it's too weak and too thin, we should have once in our life this feeling and this hopelessness that maybe we should rush a little bit more for help.
Yeah, I agree with that analogy, but I also agree with this. If you're a young woman, I don't want you to be treated like chattel. So yeah, the suffering baby and the mother, count me in for feeding them, but also count me in for standing up to their oppressor. How many people here would like to live under Taliban rule? If you say no, then help people who would say no if they could. Thank you.
So I think we need to wrap it up, sadly, although we're just getting started, really. I'd like to give a special thanks to those who participated from a distance. All of you, your contributions, very important to the conversation. And I think we can take two things from this conversation, at least I take two things. Number one, listen to Afghan voices, very important. Number two, make sure the people who are hungry get fed, and do that as a matter of urgency. So thanks to everyone who was here in this town hall. Thanks to our friends who came in via video. And this is a conversation that will continue. Thanks very much.